All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Business Strategy Roundtable. I am Zachary Keeney here with my friend John Robertson for the second time. I'm excited to have John back on. John was the first ever guest on the Business Strategies Roundtable, and the first time around we had a conversation about decentralized AI, what that means, what it is, how it is potentially important for, well, not potentially, very important for our economy and for human rights in the future. And what we're going to do today is have a conversation about some common myths related to artificial intelligence. In my world, and John, I'll give you a moment to introduce yourself here in a second, but really quickly, I want to introduce these high-level topics. In my world, I think there's a lot of information that can be capitalized on, especially now with how relevant technology is. And any narrative that is fear-based or makes individuals feel like they aren't the person or aren't capable of or aren't the person who should be engaging with AI or engaging with things that can improve their lives, I want to go out of my way to share how that's incorrect. So that's what this conversation is about today related to artificial intelligence. I imagine we might break into how decentralized AI might relate to this. But the two major myths that John and I are going to break open today are the idea that AI is going to take your job or a job, and specifically what that looks like in terms of either opportunity or how it'll really function in the economy. I think that's an important conversation. And we also hope to have time to break into what hallucinations are and how that is a little bit of a myth just in terms of how it's delivered as a narrative to the high-level public. So now I've spoken a lot, and thank you, John, for the patience. Welcome. How are you?
Oh, I like to say mixed as usual. I almost need like a radar plot of, all the dimensions of your life and then give that a score. Oh, 7.6. How am I? 7.6.
Well, you're in Salt Lake City, so you have the mountains. That's +2 at least.
Yeah, no, it's great views, and I'll take a walk in the morning and watch the clouds or the sunrise, and it's a beautiful area. And we've got that crisp fall air right now, so like 53 degrees this morning, and then of course it'll get up to 90 later in the day. And I enjoy just the variability of weather. So this is a great place in the country to live if you like things to change. The adage is, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes.
They say, believe it or not, they say that a lot of places. I loved my time in Salt Lake City. Your point about it getting cold at night is really great. It's easier to stay asleep when it's cold. So that's kind of a nice function. And then a cool thing about the valley is, even though it gets cold, the valley often prevents there from being too much precipitation because the mountains get it first. And then the super cold temperatures don't get all the way down into the valley. And my time in Salt Lake, it reminded me of winters in St. Louis that would get to, 20 would kind of be regular in the winter. And my time in Michigan, I remember one winter we had we had a negative 35 degree couple of days. And that is, I'll take 20, 20, you can figure it out, but you get into those single digits and lower, and I want to give that shit back.
There'll be days. So Salt Lake and LA both have inversion problems because they're in a valley, and the air will get cold, and the sunshine won't warm the ground enough to get thermals, and so the smog stays, and so it'll be 17 degrees in the valley, and people will go skiing, and it'll be 34, 36 degrees on the ski slopes. Yeah. And so, it's a great reason to take up skiing is get out of the gunky air and go into the fresh air where it's actually a warm, pleasant spring day.
A good friend of mine named Kevin, while I lived out there, we used to almost, it was probably every other weekend as it shook out, went up to Park City and really got to know and enjoy that mountain. That was a really nice time.
Yeah, I would have employees that, so one of the nice things, if you're a skier, sometimes they really enjoy what they call powder, because there'll be 4 feet of quote unquote powder snow, and it's like you're floating on clouds. Anyway, so I just, in part because I was enthusiastic for them, and in part because, you want a workplace that's conducive to people's hobbies. So it snowed last night. Half my team's not coming in until 2:00 because they are skiing in the powder that nobody else is skiing on until everybody comes and ruins it. Then they'll come to work. And that's so, it's just they're in the late shift today because it's powder day.
That's awesome. John, take a couple of moments. I know we did an in-depth interview the first time around, but give a couple of moments to update anybody on your background and how you became such an expert in technology, and where your knowledge as it relates to artificial intelligence comes. And then we will talk at a high level about the jobs fear problem, and then break it open. So go ahead and talk about you.
So, the quote from this morning was from Oscar Wilde. He says, "I'm not young enough to know everything," and I think of that, like, I started programming with punch cards, Fortran on an IBM 360 way back in high school. So I was fortunate enough to just have an early opportunity to start programming. And, I've been in computers and technologies for, 45 years or so. So it's always interested me. I've always enjoyed staying up to date with technologies and programming and computers and so forth. We ran into each other at a show and had some very interesting, deep conversations. So I've always enjoyed your perspective on things, where you are young enough to know everything, unlike me.
No.
And I think in some ways it's very refreshing to me. If I were to pitch to the audience, it would be, you're kind of the good cop, and I rely on your inexhaustible faith in humanity. Where I'm kind of the bad cop, where I'm old and cynical, and I'll shoot the torpedoes at things. Well, what about this? What about this weakness, and blow it up. And in a conversational balance, we may not agree on things, but all the time, but it helps me articulate better. It helps you articulate better. And I think we get to a deeper understanding of both our own thoughts and maybe closer to the essence of truth by having in sometimes just opposite conversations. And that's how we came up with the myth of AI. Was we disagreed on some things, and so let's roll up our sleeves and dive into it. And it's been. I'd love to share that with the audience. Some of those conversations and insights that we've had.
That's a great introduction to the conversation, because it's true. John and I have spent. I like to, when I'm really in a creative space, I like to be driving out in the country where there are very few other cars that I have to attribute my attention to. So that my body's really focused on keeping me alive, and I can kind of get to a space where creative ideas come. And John and I have spent many hours breaking apart some of what we believe is coming and the way things are being presented now, and where regular everyday people like John and I, and like people in the communities that we support, can capitalize on and win with, which is really exciting to me, because we're going through a technological revolution like we haven't had since the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, with textiles, and then learning how to produce factories, and learning how to, or not tech, excuse me, factories and steel, and being able to produce things at a high level industrially. We're having an opportunity to do that again with the change of what work is being done by who, and the amount of work that can get done, which is what happened at that time. The shift of what specifically human beings were doing and needed to do to produce something valuable changed drastically. And when something like that happens, there's tremendous agency and fluidity within markets for people to understand what's happening, learn, and take advantage, because it's all new, which means if you are willing to lean into the learning, you can capture and capture opportunity and have some success. So we've had lots of conversations about that. And before I dive into the first element of fear, I'll say, rather than good cop, bad cop, I like to think of it, and I think this leans into your I'm young, maybe young enough to be overly sure, which has definitely been true. I'm not afraid to admit that. And then your position of maybe more pessimistic. I think a better way to look at it is, I'm young enough to really have that optimism, or to, like, maybe young enough isn't even the thing. I that hope and optimism is still really there of what's possible, and you have such a depth of experience that you're just pointing out what needs to be identified, and both things are needed in conversation, in discourse, in businesses, and in your internal self. So I think it's a great point that you made, and I don't see you as a pessimist at all, because you always are excited about the solutions. And
Yeah.
I find that folks who are highly pessimistic are excited about the problems, and excited to show you why your optimism is unfounded. And the reality is, we made everything up in life. We've built society to this point over thousands of years, and anybody that's overly pessimistic or wants to show you why your dream is wrong is more focused on why your dream is wrong than having dreams, and that's a problem with how society's been created. So thank you for that introduction about yourself, and that opportunity to kind of share a little bit about our relationship, and why this is an interesting conversation. I would love for you to talk about how you see mainstream communication, or commonplace understanding of artificial intelligence as it's going to relate to jobs. And let's start to break into this this conversation, or I guess this myth that AI is going to displace your job. It's going to take your job. Do you mind opening that up?
Yeah, and you've made an analogy of you have horse and buggy days transitioning to cars. You have back in the late 1930s.
Oh,
Was somebody where their job was a computer, and they did addition, subtraction, multiplication, divides, and they had all kinds of tricks, slide rules, they had all kinds of tricks to compute things. And when they had a whole building in Manhattan, the Manhattan Project was hiring computers, people, to calculate whether the nuclear bomb could go supercritical or not. I mean, they had to do the math, and yet that's been replaced, right? Nobody has that job anymore.
Let me stop you, and I'm going to ask you to tell that story with more depth, because I think, actually, I know many folks who are my age and younger. I got my first cell phone in 6th grade. It was a purple Razor, and I was so freaking cool. I was texting math class. I was under the phone. You got your phone? No, it was, what a time to be alive, right? But many people, and my point in saying that is many people my age and younger, I was playing games on the thing. There was, computers it was a literal computer. There was calculators on the thing. So if you could share in more depth the timeline that you're talking about, and more specifically the job of computer, because I think it's less than 100 years ago that what you're describing was a function, and I think it draws a really, really interesting delineation to the conversation that we're having of jobs being fluid and changing consistently. So I would love for you to tell this story, spend some time going into the depth on it, because it's a great point. It's a really great point.
Well, right. And the point is along the lines, like the coachman becomes the taxi driver. And here, the human computer is replaced in modern times by a cell phone, or, they used to have those 4-function calculators. Little soul, they'd have a little solar powered thing so they could operate from the light in the room. You didn't even need a battery. And part of the change in society, whether it's computer related or not, humans adapt. And I think this is one of the things that you bring to the table, Zach, is that faith in humanity, and also a longer term vision of why are you afraid of this job going away? Because it frees you up to do a more creative job. I mean, what's less creative than adding numbers together where the human operates as a machine with no creativity? And when a machine actually replaces that, then that frees up people to be more creative, be more human, right? And less machine.
Let me ask you more.
I think some of that goes into this AI discussion that we're having.
Let me ask you more about that world. So you were alluding to a time when humans were applying for a job of computer, somebody who would go in and do computing. And then you alluded to a point in time, which is humans doing this as a part of a function, computing to determine whether the atomic bomb would function. What was around the timeline that the atomic bomb was? And I should know this, but I don't. I know it was in the 1900s. I believe it was in the 1900s.
So during World War II, the late stages, so around 1940, 1941, 80 years ago, they were coming to the end of the war, and they were racing towards the nuclear bomb between Germany and the U.S. and the U.S. threw more computers at it.
More
And
literal human computers.
human computers. They had several floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, just doing the math, and then of course they took that out to the national lab in Los Alamos, and built the test bomb from that. And since the test bomb was successful, they just kind of took off from there. And I'm not going to talk about the morality, good or bad, but they dropped the bomb on Japan and a second bomb, and that ended the war. And so, some it's interesting. Some say that the Japanese look at history after the bomb, and the U.S. looks at history before the bomb. Neither one, they don't want to talk about their past sins in Japan's case or their future sins in the U.S. case. But that's
a lot of deaths.
Anyway, kind of back to the discussion. I think society has changed because of some new invention. And
let me throw a question at you really quick, and I think it'll help with a little bit of direction here. How many human computer jobs are on Indeed or Monster.com right now?
Well, zero. The job does not exist anymore. Now you have what you call actuaries for the insurance agency. Now, but an actuary job is creative. If I were to make a distinction, an actuary will use calculus and math, and they'll set up a model, and they'll use statistics. And statistics, when they're done correct, is a very human, creative endeavor, and it takes a lot of effort. One of the reasons why people can lie with statistics is to check statistics, you have to do it all over from scratch. So there's kind of not a cheat sheet that says, oh, here's where you did it wrong.
Yeah.
You actually have to redo it. Some of that gets into the peer review science, right?
The testing and the accumulation.
Right. So part of the whole peer review science is redoing the statistic work from scratch. And if you get the same answer, then of course it's repeatable. And if you get a different answer, then maybe they did the statistics wrong. Maybe, human error in the sense of like a confirmational bias. They didn't look at all the things, or they quote unquote accidentally threw out the things that disagreed with them. No one ever does that, right? Yeah. So you'll see an action. You can get a math degree and go work for an insurance company doing statistics and modeling. You can work for a media company doing statistics and modeling, or you can go teach mathematics, right? And one of the things with math is, like, once you've reduced it down to formula, well, now the computer can do it, right? And not even AI, just the computer can do it from now on. So humans have lost that intermediate job of computation.
It was given to your point, it was given to a device that had a little solar panel and can operate off the battery of the room. And it's
right.
It's a really good point, because it's but
even into the future now. So my daughter works at she works at a company that does construction management. And so it is a huge computational system that tracks expenses and inventories and risks and timelines. And it is a computer doing that now. It's not humans penciling it in. It is humans doing the input and the constructs, but it's the computer driving the computation behind all that analysis. And there's tons of formulas and all kinds of things going on in that. And so since the 1940s, where there was a job where humans were doing that, not only is that no longer a job, but I don't think anybody even thinks of nobody thinks that you should do it by scratch. Nobody thinks that you should replace spreadsheets with people, right?
And
So
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I think the reason that is, and I want to cut in here and point to this, because this is what I think draws us back to how this is the same with AI. The system that your daughter functions as a part of is doing so many more calculations constantly as a function of the fact that it's a recurring system, where in the 40s, the 1940s, you would need that calculator human to sit there and understand the papers. And if that guy died, or if that gal died, or if they whatever, another calculator, computer, human computer, would need to come and take the amount of time to understand what's going on here, take the time to whatever, and then production can continue. What we did with the Industrial Revolution, and when we replace things like human computing with computer computing, like in that example, is we take what used to be a human function and we simplify it so that it can be done very quickly. And what that does is it creates something that can be larger, but at the edges, and this actually goes into our hallucination conversation. Well, not that I'm trying to transition yet, because I don't think we've fully made this point, but at the edges of the system itself, there are all these points where jobs are created because humans have to do something with the numbers that are now created, with the information that are created, with the data points that are gleaned. Because instead of having John, who's got 6 pieces of paper and he's whatever, and he's keeping track, he's got only 2 months of information because he keeps spilling his coffee on papers, and it's it's this 1940s style. You got to deal with that. Now you blow your computer up, and it's like, well, I'll just go get on Google Docs on my iPad, and no freaking problem. We can keep going from right where we were. Where you're able to build something that yields information and results that creates work that people can go do. And I think that's the point that I want to start driving home, the debunking of this myth that AI is going to take jobs. It's also going to create jobs by nature of what happens when you simplify large amounts of work. What are your thoughts related to that?
Well, and I think we have to add to the context of this is, part of people love drama, and part of the fear puts either a hide or a fight. So there's a motivation. Fear can be a motivator to put a fire under us to go and do something about it. And fear can also be a motivation for the human to hide and put our head in the sand and let it blow over. And part of the analogy that we're making is to show the expectation that as humans have a new tool called AI, they are going to find the optimal use for it. And if we look at the trends in the past and project them into the future, the human will become less mechanical, less of a cog in a system, and more creative and more of a driver of the system. And if we take the fear of it's going to replace our job and hide, then we don't benefit from the utilization of that tool. And if we take the fear and have it inspire us, then we are one of the early adopters in this wave where maybe we use the tool imperfectly for 10 years, but we have enough experience using it to our advantage that we are in a much, as humans, we're in a much better position to benefit from that. And I, as we were talking about before a little bit, last week I was talking to a virtual CISO. So he does security work for companies. He calls, instead of calling it a replacement because of your job, because that's more fear-based, he calls it a workforce multiplier. And he gives his own example where he's doing contracts and analysis type work. And as he feeds that through AI, he's able to accomplish 8 times more than he used to. He said, I used to be able to only have 10 clients at a time, and I was slammed with work. And now I can have 80 clients, and I have a good work-life balance. And so he's at a state where he's using AI as a tool, and you can't take it away from him. He's like, no, that's my 4-function calculator, and I don't want to have to do the math myself. Or that's my spreadsheet. I don't want to have to do the spreadsheet myself. It's already computed. I just have to, and in his case, I think this is an important point as well. He is still an expert in what he's doing. He still has to review concretely the output of the AI to ensure that it's meeting the needs of his clients. And so he probably tweaks things and so forth. But as a workforce multiplier, he's able to get 8 times more work accomplished, and that has revenue implications. And so if your job could be benefited by AI and you take advantage of it, a better way to look at it is you're more valuable because you're getting more things done.
Right. And it's the intrinsic motivation of it all. It's how am I engaging with it? And I think that point that you made, drawing, the conversation that we're having to, well, this is why it's not taking your job. You shouldn't engage with it from a fear perspective. That point about fear and choosing not to engage with it or choosing to engage with it is a really good point as it relates to your intrinsic motivation and what you're doing in your life. If you're an individual who maybe works in manufacturing and you're thinking, oh my fucking God, they're going to make these stupid AI robots and they're going to take my job. And what am I going to do? And then I'm afraid, and then I'm stressed. Instead of, okay, things are going to change. How can I capitalize on this? I know a lot about manufacturing. I've done this. I know what the robots are going to need to X, Y, and Z. How can I use artificial intelligence to position myself for a new opportunity? That person is, instead of choosing fear of what the thing's going to do to me, they're looking at, well, how can I use this to better my life? I don't want to be hammering on the assembly line all day. I don't want to do that. So how can I take what I know about that and apply it? I think that's a really, really important an important note. Now, you talked about workforce multiplying and the ability for this individual to do more. The other thing that it does is it gives the individuals who have a less depth of knowledge to do more. So let's take the same individual who maybe has a really strong understanding of manufacturing and partner them up with this person that's really, really strong with their auditing and assessments, like the person that you're talking about. And if you're able to teach the individual, this is how you utilize the tool to produce these reports, now you're creating a job where the thing that the person needs to know how to do is engage with the artificial intelligence that's producing the output, while the individual that's really good at doing assessing can focus on what they're really good at. So it's almost like in a scenario that you're describing as a workforce multiplier. The reason it's multiplying the ability of work you're able to do is because it it's doing the thing for you that isn't specific to what your skills are. Putting a report together is less technical than needing to know what goes into the report. And it sounds like the same thing, but it's not. It's the difference between um, driving to a place with directions and knowing how to get to a place with no directions in a number of different pathways. And one requires a depth of expertise, and the other requires the ability to follow directions and be engaged, which is already what the majority of manual labor jobs are. It's a training exercise. Oh, you've never made a pizza before? Well, come here, because here's what it looks like. I'd love for you to take the analogy of the vehicle, where something that wasn't possible before then became possible. And I would love for you to overlay this fear perspective, or choice, the choice to be fearful and hide from what's coming, or the choice to recognize, and take agency, and overlay that with the car analogy, because I think it's probably the invent of the vehicle was probably the thing that gave individuals the most inherent ability to do new things in the past, X number of years. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead.
No, and in fact, let's even modernize it. Everybody has GPS. Predominantly people like to drive with the navigator on, even if they're highly familiar with where they're going. And the navigator tool, the one I use, even shows traffic pattern and will reroute around roadblocks. So I get up in the morning. Of course, I know how to get to work, but if I do my navigator, I get an indication of if there's is there something wrong on the way I normally go? Should I go a different way? So that's with the familiar pattern with me as an expert of how to get to work. And yet, on the other hand, if I'm going someplace new, it's highly convenient to use the tool to route my path, even though I could look it up on a map. I could look it up on a paper map. I could, Salt Lake has a grid system, so I could say, yeah, I roughly know, where it is. And I can drive around the block 3 times looking for it. As a guy, I'm not going to ask directions, right? So, another world-changing event that you probably missed was the web search engines. So before web search engines, and this is, we're talking the late 90s. Before web search engines, humans had to maintain a high level of referential knowledge. They had to be their own librarian, if you will. They had to have index cards of where information was.
I still know the phone number to my neighborhood pizza place. 636-225-8000.
Yeah, I mean, that's all referential knowledge. And yet, in the late 90s, search engines changed the world, relieving humans, for better or worse, relieving humans of the need to build up referential knowledge, because you just search for it. And whether it's the phone number of the pizza place, whether it's the traffic route to someplace, whether it's, the background of somebody that you're interested in, investment wise or socially wise, here's all this referential knowledge that the human no longer has to store in their brains. And so, part of what we're talking about is, if you look at AI as a tool instead of the end of the world, of course, as humans, we're going to use the better tool, right? We're going to use the better bicycle. We're going to use the smartphone instead of the 4-function solar-powered calculator. It's just easier. It's just more convenient. So you don't want to deprive yourself of that anyway. And as we're on this cusp of AI changing people's jobs, and the initial one is along the lines of referential knowledge, but I think a way to view it is instead of your referential librarian that the search engines are, this is really more of an assistant. And so this virtual CISO, what he's doing is, okay, write up a standard contract for this company. It's like a boilerplate. Here it is. Here's the contract you usually do. I change everything for the company. Oh, wait, they want these two things. Okay, here's the assistant spits out another one. And then the expert goes through and makes sure everything's correct. But instead of taking all the time writing it and writing the second draft, they only really have to do the final draft. Well, who wouldn't want that tool? In my industry with programming,
Can I touch on that for a second? Let me touch on
yeah.
that for a second. So the thing that you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's taking somebody's job who could be doing that. But the thing is, that that completion of the first draft so quickly, what it allows for the business to go on to the next, helping another customer. And it also, when you deliver that when you complete that draft quickly, it's like doing the math quickly on the equation. You're able to go to the next step in growth, which is then like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we implement? How do we do this? So the tool does something that then creates a bunch of different points for more work to be done because of the information. Instead of letting you, and we could come back to your, you were going to draw a reference to something in your computing world, but I want to touch on the car thing because I really love it. Similarly, when cars were created for the first time, you may have decided, well, I'm afraid. I don't want to learn how to drive. People die. That thing crashes. Well, what if, well, there's smoke
It goes
coming out of the
25
car.
miles an hour. Are you crazy?
Yeah, are you crazy?
Your head will explode.
Yeah, it prevented the
They
individual.
literally said that. They said that with the train, which went 35 miles an hour. They were like, humans weren't designed to go that fast. Their blood will explode.
That's so funny. I mean, they probably were physics correct from a physics perspective, from the idea of if your blood was actually going that fast. But so the individual that chose the fear position related to vehicles then loses the ability to go out and have the ability to reach a circumference that's much larger, meaning going to the store is quicker, going to work is quicker, the ability to have job opportunities in a distance that's much further than where you were able to reach before. That is the creation of opportunity. If you lean into the learning how to use the new technology, which is the vehicle, there may have been horse and buggy riders or horse trainers and all these different things that were like, oh my God, this is going to prevent me from being able to whatever. But it really is the opportunity at new businesses to be created. All these car manufacturers, all these tire shops, mechanics, tool makers to fix the cars, part makers, all those things get created and are the spawn of this new tool that's being created. And what I really like in the juxtaposition there of the creation of the car as it relates to the fear decision is it speaks directly to the intrinsic opportunity of the individual to choose to either be afraid of AI or to choose to take it as an opportunity and lean heavily into it and get the extra circumference of opportunity that the car gives you and where you can get to. Get the knowledge, lean in, don't be afraid of it. That fear comes from the perspective that it's going to be bad for you. If I was somebody that was greed oriented, which I'm not, I am highly service based as a person in general. I like to see those around me be happy and succeed. I think that's what makes for good communities and what makes for a good life, makes for good families. But if I wasn't that way and I was greed oriented and I wanted to be, a multi billionaire and I wanted to hold on to my market share and I wanted my stock price to, if I was one of those types of people, I might be motivated to push a story that made me an individual, the intrinsic individual, to fear or to feel fear as it relates to AI. But what I'm hoping to drive home with this conversation is that is the exact opposite way that you should feel, because what this really is the opportunity for you to take on a completely different, to have so much more opportunity and rather than losing something. Now, you may lose something in the very, very immediate short term. But if you lean heavily into the opportunity that's going to be provided, you may see that what you're capable of doing, and you drew creativity into the mix, as opposed to hammering at your space on the manufacturing line. You may have the opportunity to do something that you never thought you were able to, because there's all these free tools and there's all these ways things can get done, and our AI can do so much for you. And the reason that I say that is because if you take the fear angle and choose not to learn how to drive the car, somebody else is going to learn how to drive the car. And that's the thing that you should actually be afraid of, is not, well, did I drive the car wrong for 10 years? Or did I not use AI well enough for 10 years? Or did somebody use it better? Oh, comparison. Did you lean into the new tool that's available and widely available and free? Or did you choose to be fearful and let time roll you over? And that is what I think the conversation should be. Go ahead.
Yeah. In other words, we've called it workforce multiplier, and we've given the example of the computer doing work that a paralegal might have done. So there's the minus of the paralegal. I don't need a paralegal anymore because this much work is getting done. But there's two sides of the workforce multiplier, like you're pointing out, that if there is a new vacuum created by the increased productivity of an individual, and if you're on the other side of the workforce multiplier, there's a vacuum of people filling in those other, that other work that is spawned by that increase of productivity. So, if
the first mechanic wasn't great, like the first mechanic wasn't the Honda guy that comes out all sharp and everything perfect and all the tools clean. The first mechanic was the guy who had just enough knowledge to help his community and all of their Model Ts that needed this basic thing fixed.
He was an enthusiast.
Right.
So be an enthusiast, right?
Exactly.
And that's where put yourself on the other side of the workforce multiplier, where the increased productivity of others means there's more work to be done somewhere, not as a paralegal, but look at all the work that's getting done and get in on that extra things. Be that enthusiast, so that when the AI breaks, you're there to say, well, here's how you fix it.
What if I don't know how to use? What if I don't have a skill with AI, John? I'm sure a lot of people, because the fear narrative is, well, you can't use AI. Well, you don't have a college degree. You don't have a well. What do you say to those people? And I can.
So I mean, if you're in a position where you are, where the threat of AI replacing your job is a credible threat, you have some skills, and it's kind of along the lines of, how to use a calculator, don't you? Why wouldn't you use a calculator? Why are you doing it by hand? You know how to use the spreadsheet. Why why are you doing that by hand? Why are you writing it out by hand? Why are you putting it in documents instead of putting it into a spreadsheet? Why aren't you using the tools available? And so I guess I'm not a believer that you necessarily have to do the whole retraining. That the joke of, hey, just learn to code. If your job is being replaced by AI, you have skills that you can reposition on the other side of that workforce multiplier.
And the AI can freaking help you learn.
Right.
If you're
Yeah.
so afraid of the AI that you can't even get the low-hanging fruit of like the personal efficiencies that it can give you, then you're choosing not to help yourself. Because you can sit down with it and say, pretend to be my career counselor. This is the circumstance, but you have to start to engage with it and see it as a resource instead of an enemy. Otherwise, it'll be an enemy. You're going to feel like it's an enemy if you position it.
Right. And this is the current state of technology, and I'd like to get into hallucinations after this. But the current state of technology
to do it in a few weeks.
is that you still have to have an expert look over things. So if you're a paralegal being replaced by AI, use the AI for paralegal, review it, and become 8 times more productive, and then offer your skills to who needs somebody that's 8 times more productive. Everybody does. Right. So even not even changing your job, you don't necessarily have to change your job. Just embrace the tool, and that is now, that increased productivity is something that you own and you can market, and you can, because current technology with AI, the expert still has to review it. And so if you're a paralegal,
the businesses from the Industrial Revolution are still being made. And I mean that from this juxtaposition of this Industrial Revolution. It's not clear yet what the mechanics shops are going to be, what the part manufacturers are going to be, what the AutoZone type businesses are going to be. But if you lean into this skill acquiring now, as the vacuums become clear in industry, and all these like MSPs right now is a really good example. There's booming growth in the MSP industry because all of these large corporations down to small businesses need some level of IT services, and that's not typically the strength of every business owner, right? That booming vacuum, right? That vacuum created by what happened in industry can be capitalized on. When the Model T came out, that vacuum of, I need my car fixed, led to the creation of these other businesses. If you're engaged with and utilizing AI as a tool and a support now, as things unfold and opportunity presents, you will be able to lean in and capitalize on it, as opposed to somebody else who's more educated on how to use the hammer getting the job. So to your point of the productivity, it really does come down to your ability to use the tool. A lot of artificial intelligence, it'll teach you what you need to know to use it, because you can ask it questions. How should I use you? And that's never existed before. You used to have to go to college, which had a bar. Show me what you've done before. Here's the money you have to put up to engage. But now you want to learn something. The only thing that's in the way of you going out and learning something is your willingness to utilize the tool that's readily available and there for you to learn. And if you choose to do that, and if you have skills and knowledge because you've done that, opportunity will not be a problem at all.
Right. And we only have 5 minutes left. Do we just introduce
yeah, probably
the hallucinations?
I think so. Well, John and I were, well, this is the young enough to think I know everything coming through again. The optimism. I was like, we'll get through 2 of these. No way, we'll be able to break this down real quick. And I've got my notes here, and it looks like we may have to turn this into just a regular, and I planned on doing it anyway, but we'll have to do hallucinations as its own focus. The next time that I have you on, which hopefully we do in relatively short order. But go ahead, introduce the conversation, and then we'll have you do a little bit about what enCircle is, and we can tell
Right.
everybody Happy Friday.
Happy Friday the 13th. So I guess what surprised, so they call it hallucinations, which is a symptomatic term from the consumers of AI in its current form. And I guess what surprised me initially, Zach, is that you dug in pretty deep, resisting the term hallucination.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get into that. Closer in our future discussion. So I don't necessarily want to dive into that.
You're gonna rev me up. You're gonna make me do it now.
I know. We'll just go right into a 2-hour session instead of a 1-hour session. But the point is that with machines and with mathematics behind the computational centers, there are gaps in the AI model that are unfillable. And when the answer to a question of the AI lands in that gap where there's no information, AI is driven to build a pattern that answers the question, even though the answer really is in a gap of territory. And therefore, what AI then presents to the user is inaccurate, or some would call it made up. And so that's why, from the periphery, the consumers of it, so a question would be, okay, I need this information, and give me the authors of the research papers that was behind the information. And 2 of the authors don't even exist. They're not real people, but the pattern looks good, right? The bibliography is perfect. It just doesn't exist. And so that's where, from a symptomatic stage, they're like, hey, AI just hallucinated this. And you can actually ask AI, okay, give me those references. Those 2 references don't exist. And it says, yeah, I know they don't exist, but it still gave it to you. Yeah. And so now you have to second guess. Well, give me the references again. You have to second guess. Is it gonna really give me good references back or not?
Yeah.
And so from the human perspective, they're like, AI is just hallucinating on me. It made up things that don't exist, even though the pattern's good. And that's why you look at the virtual CISO that was doing his contracts. He can review it and say, okay, rewrite this sentence because it's not accurate. He's not expecting perfection out of the AI. He's expecting a rough second, third draft, and he's doing the final things. And so the virtual CISO is watching out for what AI is delivering him with a clear understanding.
That's
Go
it.
ahead.
With a clear understanding. And I don't want to continue the conversation any more than the point that I'm about to make, because this will be the teaser for next time around when we go into the full conversation. But choosing to use the word hallucination, I think, directly leads to people disengaging with AI, as opposed to gaining a clear understanding so they can work around what are relatively solvable problems. So that's going to be the conversation next time around why Zach hates the term hallucination and thinks that it is. I think that it keeps people out. And that's why I don't like it, because I want it to be inclusive and I want everybody to be able to use AI and grow forward. So that's why I don't like hallucination. That'll be the topic of the conversation that next time that I have John on, and then I'll have notes to pretend like maybe we'll go to another topic, even though I'm sure we'll bat it around the whole time. John, tell us a little bit about enCircle Marketplace, and if somebody's interested in your expertise, how they can work with you.
Sure. So enCircle Marketplace is, we cater to managed service providers that do security work for their clients, and we just have a bevy of vendors and experts that the service provider can draw upon as needed. We have AI pen testing, which we'll get into, because it makes an interesting point on the quote unquote hallucinations that ends up being very highly useful.
The other side of hallucination.
Yeah.
Where it's not actually a hallucination. Oh, all of a sudden, what are we going to call that?
Yeah, what are we going to call that? And it also, it sheds light of, if you're using AI as a tool, you can use AI so-called hallucinations as a tool as well. Right. Which is, it's fascinating. Anyway.
Next time.
So that's what enCircle Marketplace does. My customers are the MSP service providers, and then we have a marketplace of vendors and experts that essentially give you a deeper bench of what you need to provide your clients with.
And they're all highly vetted, and folks that somebody with John's high level of character would say is a good vendor for an IT service provider to be working with, which I think personally is one of the most important benefits of choosing to operate with a marketplace is considering, well, what's in the marketplace, what's the character of the people putting the marketplace together, and how is this going to impact me being a part of it. So I think very highly of John and what he's put together, and definitely recommend his set of solutions. Is there anything else we should cover before we wave at folks and say happy weekend?
Hey, a little bit of Tri-Unity. You
Sure.
Gave me a pitch. You need to take a pitch.
Tri-Unity Strategies helps startups, IT service providers, small businesses, and restaurants solve unique problems and scale. And we have a number of different ways that you can engage with us, of which will be updated on our website finally by the end of this week, which is like a huge freaking win for me, because it's been a beast that I've been trying to strangle for a long freaking time now. So I'll be happy to have that done. John, thanks for coming on. To the audience, thank you guys for joining us. Looking forward to next week, where we're going to be having a conversation with Robert Isaacs from 9 Minds about how entrepreneurs, small business owners, and people thinking about being a small business or an entrepreneur can capitalize on the boom of open source technology and do some things for cheap. So that'll be a good conversation. And John, thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to the next time that we think creatively together, and to the next time you come on the show.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks, everyone.
Happy Friday, everybody. Have a good weekend.